Hey, Internet Bestie. Whether you're hoping your period starts soon or you're in your 2-week wait, hoping for a baby and trying to keep busy, this video is going to be helpful for you. We're going to be diving into signs your period's about to start soon versus signs that you have really early symptoms of pregnancy. And we're also going to be diving into the differences between the two just so that you can find some comfort in what's happening at this moment with your body. Let's go. So the big question is, are you pregnant or is your period starting soon? And the signs are very similar, sometimes annoyingly so. Mother Nature definitely has a sense of humor. Things like cramping and bloating and acne breakouts and increased appetite and headache and backache and spotting and sore breasts. I mean, even changes in your mood are all related to both pregnancy as well as your period beginning. And it can be so frustrating sometimes for you. Even something you think is a surefire sign of maybe pregnancy, like frequent urination, you later learn that that too can be a PMS symptom. And the reason for this is because during our last phase of our cycle, our luteal phase, frequent urination could be a thing. One of progesterone's key roles is to hold on to our body's liquid. And as we end our cycle, towards the end of our luteal phase, about to start our period, our progesterone dips, which signals to our body to release the liquid that it's been holding on to. And this also explains why you feel bloated the week leading up to your period as well. But not to fret. While PMS symptoms and early pregnancy symptoms are similar, very similar, there are a few distinct differences. I got you. So timing plays a big role in all of this. For instance, the time you may find spotting may be different depending on the length of your cycle. When you're about to have your period, spotting typically happens a day or two before it begins. And when it comes to spotting before a positive pregnancy test, that tends to come a bit earlier for most people. That's usually 10 to 14 days post-ovulation, which for those people will be before they expect the spotting from their period. For others though, this may occur around the same time, which can be a bit confusing, but the difference is going to be spotting for your period is going to be, like I said, the 2 days, day or two before your period, but then it's going to get progressively heavier, and that leads to the start of your cycle. Whereas if you're spotting from implementation bleeding, that's going to be different because you're going to spot very lightly and then it disappears. It stops. You'd go from spotting to nothing. I remember when I was having my daughter, the spotting occurred only when I was going to the bathroom. When I wiped, I would see very faint light spotting, and it only occurred for a day. And when I say light, I mean in color as well as in volume. Super short-lived, super light. That tends to be the spotting that you see when you're expecting pregnancy. But the tricky part arises because not everyone who is going to get pregnant has implementation spotting. So at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, so what are the other signs? Because I need to know. Well, before we dive into that in just a moment, I think it's important for us to look at and really understand what our cycle looks like, how it functions, and what's happening during specific times. So the phases of your menstrual cycle are as follows: menstruation, follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal phase. Now the menstruation piece is pretty straightforward, right? That's when your period begins. Day 1 of period bleeding is day 1 of your cycle, and that tends to last between 3 to 6 days. Now once that period bleeding is over, you get into the follicular phase. Now in the follicular phase, the egg is maturing, getting ready to be released for ovulation. So in addition to your egg maturing and getting ready to be released, what also happens is your endometrium lining, also known as your uterus lining, right here, your uterine lining, begins building back up because it all just shed for your period to occur. That's what your period is, right? But it begins building back up in the event that an egg is fertilized, because it does have to bury itself into the uterine lining. Your next phase, of course, is ovulation, and as we know, that means that your egg is being released. After that comes your luteal phase, where if that egg was fertilized during that time, it will bury itself into the uterine lining. Okay, so now that you've looked at the phases, you understand what is happening during your whole cycle, right? From the time your period starts to the day before it starts again. That entire thing's your cycle, your menstrual cycle. So during this time though, it's important to understand that after ovulation and during that follicular phase, when that implementation occurs, once it occurs, if it occurs, then and only then are you really going to start to get those early pregnancy symptoms. Another thing to remember is that before your period, progesterone levels begin to decrease. This is not the case with pregnancy. In fact, they begin to rise about 10 times higher to support your pregnancy. And another way that timing comes into play, and which is a pretty obvious one, but something that is worth mentioning, is the timing of intercourse. If you only had intercourse after ovulation, like after the days the egg is alive, right? Or you did it prior to the 5 days before ovulation, then the chances of you being pregnant is really, really low, especially if you did do your ovulation test or had an ultrasound where you can tell. Ovulation tests, by the way, tend to show you when you get that spike, the LH spike, which is just prior to ovulation occurring. So if the timing of any intercourse was not around that time when you can get pregnant, that small window that you can each and every month, then those symptoms that you're feeling are likely PMS symptoms. Okay, now let's get into the biggest ways to tell if you actually are pregnant. Because at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, is there any way I can tell for sure? And the reality is you can watch a million videos like this, and you may have. In fact, let me know in the comments if you have been watching tons of videos like this to keep your mind occupied during this time. In any event, if you have watched a ton of videos like this, you will know by this point that everybody experiences different symptoms up until the point of either their period or a positive pregnancy test. And the only way you're going to know for sure about what your early pregnancy signs are or what your premenstrual symptoms are is when you know your particular monthly signals. That way you're able to monitor and check the variants that occur. Do you typically have cramps on a monthly basis right before your period starts? Do you normally have backache? Do you normally have frequent urination? If the answer is no to those things, but it's happening with intensity now, then that may be something to stop and look at and say, okay, well, this is different from my normal PMS symptoms. I could potentially be pregnant. Is spotting normal for you? What about hunger pains or acne before your period? Are those things different this go round? Because here's the thing, no one knows your body's symptoms and signals better than you. When we're hyper-focused on our post-ovulation symptoms, whether that's because you really want a baby or you really don't, do you boo, no judgment zone over here. When we're super hyper-focused on those things, sometimes we're picking up on little small things that we typically have, but we've just never noticed before. Which is why it's really important to make sure you're tracking these things on a monthly basis, whether that's in a notebook, on your notes app on your phone, or in your favorite period tracking app. That way you can do a true comparison between previous cycles and know for sure what's happening with your body. And if you track your BBT, which is basal body temperature, you will know that the spike happens post-ovulation. However, it remains high right up until your period begins. But if you're looking at previous months and it's higher temperatures than you typically have and nothing else has changed, you're still consistently doing it at the same time of day, and you aren't traveling or sick or anything like that, everything else is normal, then that may be something to look into as well. And of course, one of the best and most accurate ways to determine whether or not you're pregnant or your period's starting is to just take a pregnancy test. And I know, waiting to take one can feel like forever. And if you're particularly anxious to have a baby or not have a baby, then there could be a lot of stressors involved in that as well, and the wait leading up to it. Taking it easy on yourself, having some patience, and releasing judgment on your actions or inactions at this time is an absolute must. And I know you're probably wishing there was some magical formula or one specific symptom that lets you know right away whether you are about to have a baby or your period's about to begin. There just simply isn't one. And listen, I'm here to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. I hope this video is super helpful for you though. And I'm sure at this point, especially if you've watched other videos like this, you know that there's no one specific thing, but these videos just make you feel better. And if that's the case, let me know below as well. What are you watching this video for? Is it because you just like these videos? Are you hoping to conceive? Are you hoping your period starts soon? What's the reason? Also, if you are Team TTC, I think our words are super important. So I challenge you to change your thoughts and your words from TTC, which is trying to conceive, to WTC, working towards conception. And that's a small change, but it makes a huge difference because trying means it may or may not happen, whereas working towards something means it's gonna happen. I'm working towards it. It's just a play with your subconscious that really just helps change and shift things for you internally. Okay, bye. The battery just died. How rude and disrespectful of it.